A former Indian minister goes on trial in the largest ever corruption scandal in the country, putting the Prime Minister under tremendous pressure. Just why is this case different, and how big is the problem of corruption in the world's largest democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm James Bays. A former minister has gone on trial in India for the biggest corruption scandal the country's ever seen. The defendants are accused of selling off mobile phone frequencies at a fraction of their value in exchange for bribes. It's a costly affair. India's treasury may have lost up to $40 billion in revenue, as Pranav Suri now explains.
It's the start of one of India's most anticipated trials. In the dock is a former minister, a lawmaker, some of India's biggest corporate executives, and even a Bollywood filmmaker. All are accused of playing key roles in the country's biggest ever scam, which cost the government up to $39 billion. The case goes back to 2008. It's all about second-generation Spectrum mobile phone licenses, which were issued on a first-come, first-served basis. Raja, the telecoms minister at the time, has been accused of awarding the lucrative contracts well below their market value. The others have been accused of paying him a hefty fee for the privilege. But it was only in 2009 that investigations began. The case spotlights the relationship between big businesses, government, and the manner in which contracts are handed out. And the revelations triggered the biggest anti-corruption protests India has ever witnessed. It also put the government under pressure, with the Indian Supreme Court questioning whether the Prime Minister did enough to prevent the sales of telecom licenses.
Any Prime Minister with any kind of position and power would have dismissed the minister when he refused to listen to him. But unfortunately, this Prime Minister is not in that position where he can dismiss ministers at his like and dislike.
But now it's about more than the political fallout. Investor confidence has dipped in India's telecom sector, once considered the country's beacon of hope. Critics say there's still a long way to go before corruption can be completely cleaned out of Indian politics.
It's a short-term relief for the larger Indian story and the Indian public, because there are far more deep-rooted issues of corruption that's going to reappear very often in time, given the entangled political business nexus of this country.
India's parliament will start its next session in just a few days from now. It's expected that the country's opposition is going to up the ante on the government over this telecommunications scandal. And for now, people are watching to see whether any more high-profile casualties come out of this case. Pranav Suri, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Well, to discuss this issue, I'm joined by our guests from New Delhi, Nandita Rao, attorney and activist specialising in civil rights. Also in Delhi, Anupama Jha, executive director of the India branch of Transparency International. And from London, Rani Singh, security analyst for CSD, Community Safety and Development. Rani is also the author of Sonia Gandhi, An Extraordinary Life, an Indian Destiny. Well, let's start with Anupama in Delhi. Let me ask you, why is this case creating so many headlines in India?
This case is creating so many headlines in India primarily because of the amount of loss to the exchequer. Also, the fact that the minister is directly involved and he has been sent to the jail. It is also the other reason why it is making headlines is also because it is one in a series of scams that has rocked India in recent times. So all this together, and more importantly, the fact that it brings to the fore the politician and private sector collusion to the limelight, all this has highlighted the problem, and people are very, very angry and upset about the telecom scam in India.
Rani, this case, though, involves some very high-profile names and a government minister, or former government minister now.
That's right. Not only that, it also involves not only former and serving government ministers, it also involves business leaders and people in public life, and the names have been brought in from the media as well. So in terms of the range of people involved, not just the amount, This is the biggest corruption scandal in India's history. That's why it's making headlines.
Anupama, this case seems to have been fast-tracked. It's been brought to the courts pretty quick. But will it be a case that is concluded quickly, or could it go on for a very long time?
I'm not very sure about that, because the process of law, the legal proceedings takes time. So I'm not very sure about it. Also, the fact that a politician, a former minister is involved, so one also has to understand the dynamics of the current ruling party and the ex-minister. So, you know, a lot of other things are also involved here. So I'm not sure whether at the moment it appears that it is fast-tracked, but how long it's going to take, we don't really know. We only hope, the people of this country, people of India, hope that it is decided very soon.
Rani, it's obviously a complex case because it involves financial information and financial details concerning the telecom industry. Now, the Indian telecom industry is, some say, a license to print money.
You know, this goes back to the whole corruption issue, James, which is pervasive throughout India and throughout much of the world. So I think, you know, the figures involved, as I said before, make it the biggest corruption scandal. But it's not just unique to the telecom industry. Of course, with the amount of mobile users in India, the scale and scope of it gives you so much more scope for corruption, allegedly.
Anupama, we have the former telecoms minister involved. We'll go to the wider political ramifications later in our discussion. But is it possible that the Prime Minister himself could be called before this court? Because I believe he has immunity under the law.
Well, the fact that you say the minister was a part of his cabinet, so the role of the Prime Minister cannot completely be ignored. It is also alleged that he was in the know of things. That is why the accountability of politicians, including the Prime Minister, including the ministers, is extremely important. For a long time we have been talking about it, but somehow, for whatever reasons, you know, politicians and administrators in this country do not really feel accountable to people, and there is complete lack of transparency, which has led to a rise in corruption in the country. So I do hope if the court feels that there is a need to call the Prime Minister, he will be called to the court, but it is for the court to decide.
Rani, I was speaking to an Indian journalist on the phone earlier on today. This case involves the telecoms ministry, but I was told that some journalists refer to some of the ministries as the ATM ministries, the ones that where money is involved, where trade is involved, where industry is involved. Do you see this as a much wider problem?
Absolutely, James. I mean, if we just look at the history of the last year or two, there has been the sports ministry allegedly involved with the Commonwealth Games, whereby it's been alleged that much money has been has gone astray, and there's a minister, a former minister, in jail at the moment for that. Then there's in the state of Maharashtra, there has been a scandal over homes that were allocated for war widows, and those homes going to other people. Then in Karnataka, in another state where the BJP has been in power, there's a mining scam. So, you know, how many more different subject ministries can be covered? I mean, it sort of seems to be completely across the board.
Anupama, you deal with this every day. Is this like the tip of the iceberg? The bit we can see is much smaller than the bit that's hidden beneath the surface?
Absolutely, James, because so far we have not even talked about the civil aviation scam, and I'm sure there are a lot of many other scams that we have not even discussed. And this is a major problem in the country, because on one hand you have mega corruption, and on the other hand we also have the issue of petty corruption. And ultimately it's the poor who suffers. The poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer. There is a huge disparity between the rich and the poor, and the situation seems to be extremely grim in the country.
Nandita in Delhi, let's put to one side the high-level corruption for a minute. Tell us how corruption affects normal life for normal people on the streets of Delhi.
Yeah, I'd just like to say one thing before this, which is that, this policy prescription of neoliberalism, which India has sort of prescribed to only in the mid-90s, like world over. I just want to say that corruption is not peculiar just to India or the third world. Unfortunately, we have seen that capitalism has only perpetrated what you call crony capitalism, So neoliberalism has brought with it to every country a certain nature of corruption, which sort of takes the form of lobbying or financial gratification or foreign policy negotiation, which brings with it fallouts or benefits to corporations. And in a similar way, the fact that India has made neoliberal choices, our whole labor law framework has changed. We used to have a food distribution network, public food distribution network, which benefited a vast majority of people. The government has withdrawn that. Then we have an employment guarantee scheme, which is very minimalistic to compensate for the rollback in labor laws. So the petty corruption, I don't think is impoverishing people as much as the policy prescription.
I understand that, but can you just tell me about that petty corruption on a daily level? What sort of things do people need to go and get a bribe to do, normal people in India?
Well, there is some petty corruption. If you have to get a passport, you need to pay like some speed money to an agent who will make your file move faster. Or if you have to register a purchase of a house, you need to pay some speed money to get that done faster. But this type of corruption mainly affects people who actually have some property. But a vast majority of India is below the poverty line. They don't even have food to eat. So
Anupama,
really,
tell me about this petty corruption. I think it's important to discuss this petty corruption because maybe it is part of the public reaction to the high-level corruption when we hear the sort of daily corruption which people put up with. What's it like for ordinary people?
James, our study, Transparency International India, conducted a study called India Corruption Study in 2008, and we found that poor people in India, those living below the poverty line sector, had to cough up rupees 9,000 million as bribe to avail basic and need-based services. This means that services such as electricity, water, ration supply, NREGS, which is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, police services. These are some services which they are expected to get free. They don't really have to bribe any government official in order to avail these services, but poor people actually had to bribe in order to get these services. So that is a very difficult scenario for very poor people in India. For instance, if you need a hospital bed in a government hospital, you actually have to bribe in order to get that bed. So this is something that poor people in India, those living below the poverty line sector, actually have to face in their everyday lives.
Rani Singh in London, do you think that is part of the reason why there's been so much anger about this high-level corruption? Because everyone feels the issue of corruption, everyone in the country.
Yes, I do think so. I mean, it's sort of generally accepted, and as we were told earlier on, it's not just endemic in India, but it is very much accepted in India. When you go there, right from the minute you land, you have to grease somebody's palm to get what you want. And it's not just the beleaguered poor, the people at the bottom of society, even the lower middle class, the middle class. If you're trying to set up a business or run a business, if the tax inspectors come round, you have to grease their palms to get them off your back more quickly. Otherwise, they'll stay with you, stay around a lot longer. So I think there is a lot of anger, but I think what's surfaced over the last couple of years particularly is that people are so horrified by the amounts of money involved and what's been revealed through the courts at a very senior level, that they're just absolutely fed up with it all because all the alleged corruption hasn't actually helped their lives.
And people are starting to protest, aren't they, Nandita? In recent months, we've seen protests, we've seen hunger strikes.
Well, if you're referring to the India Against Corruption movement, it's not very clear yet whether that was kind of a opposition motivated movement, because there are certain sort of Hindu right-wing forces which have an allegiance to the main opposition party in India. And there's a lot of belief that, in fact, this so-called people's protest has actually been sort of backed by them, and it's been financed by huge corporate interests. So I'm not so sure whether it's really a people's protest, and it's been more an urban protest. Smaller towns and villages have seen no such upsurge or uprising, because they are actually suffering, as I'm saying again and again, from policy choices which are being made to ingratiate, India with forces that be, because, in India, India is dying to be a permanent member of the Security Council. So there are a lot of policy choices which are being made, such as allowing foreign multinationals into the grain industry, not investing in agriculture, prioritizing call centers and service industries, which enable foreign industry, which are actually hitting the rural and small town poor. So this India Against Corruption movement has had no presence in these places. It's a media metro phenomena which is backed by the Hindu right wing, and this is my opinion of it.
Rani Singh, your view on that. Do you think these are genuine protests, or do you think they are being manipulated by political forces?
I think politicians are quick to jump in on and capitalise on things. And I don't have any evidence for what Nandita is saying. However, I would say my sense is, from having been there recently to India and also from talking to people, is that there is a lot of genuine anger and really strong feeling amongst people in towns and across the classes. People are worried, people are fearful, people do not know what's going to happen, people do not know whether the government is going to last. And talking to the point of the beleaguered poor, the man in the village, he and his wife are so busy trying to scrape together enough money just to feed themselves for maybe just one meal a day, that of course they haven't got time or inclination to go and join a protest. It's because they're so worried about, just feeding themselves.
Anupama, in Delhi, another thing the opposition have seized on is the issue of black money, secret bank accounts in Switzerland that have billions of dollars. What's your assessment of the size of that amount that is being held abroad?
James, it's extremely difficult to calculate the amount of black money because it's black money. According to GFI, Global Financial Integrity, a Washington-based NGO, the amount in various tax havens is $462 billion US. But we are not really sure if this is the amount. It could be more, it could be less than that. But it is a huge problem in the country. there is so much money that goes out of the country. Even as we speak now, there is a lot of talk about recovery of stolen assets to bring back black money. But what is also extremely important is to prevent the outflow of money. Banks and financial institutions really have to gear up to this. They have to all the stakeholders within the country have to work together to ensure that black money, first, why is black money being created, how it is being created, and to prevent the outflow of black money. That is something that all of us have to work, but clearly we don't see any political will. We don't find that there is enough political will to stop this outflow and to bring back money that has already gone out.
Rani Singh, let me ask you, why do you think there isn't the political will? And do you think all of the politicians are failing here, the opposition as well as the current government?
The issue of corruption pervades throughout the political spectrum, James. That's without a doubt. I don't think one party can point the finger at any other because it's so endemic in society. And I would say even the subject of funding of political parties could be brought within the remit if there's the inclination. I mean, there are so many vested interests, and it is to do with funding, perhaps, of parties as well. You know, money rules in India, doesn't it? So, politicians are so dependent on their backers. So, having said that, you know, it is the Right to Information Act, which, however faulty, which has been introduced in recent years under the United Progressive Alliance government, which has enabled many people in civil society to request information and be given it. So many of the scams and the alleged scams and scandals have been able to be reported and investigated because of the government's own Right to Information Act. So what do you say there?
Nandita, some people have said to me that one of the problems is the political elite. We have the same old faces, the same families, whereas we have new figures emerging in business, entertainment. Politics never seems to change in India.
You know, first of all, as I said earlier, I disagree that in India there's more corruption than in other parts of the world. George Bush did not bomb Iraq for democracy or Libya. NATO's not in Libya for democracy. They're there because the oil companies are pushing them. So yes, there is a corporate political nexus in India also, but this is a global phenomena. The fact that in India it's more visible and people are actually being taken to task, I think is a compliment to the Indian justice system. And as Rani pointed out, to the RTI Act, that today the Controller and Auditor General is putting a flag saying that, you know what, this kind of money has been lost to the public exchequer and our ministers are actually in jail. I feel great pride in this fact that there is an accountability mechanism. It's not that politicians are getting away with it. And I don't agree that every politician in India is lacking in idealism or is lacking in honesty. I mean, this is a poor country which in 50 years has come very far compared to a lot of other countries which, you know, in the 40s and 60s became free from colonization. We are an industrialized nation. We are a country which helped a lot of countries in Africa and, you know, in the non-aligned movement. So it's not just such a dark story. Yes, there is corruption. Yes, there needs to be a change in the electoral system, but our legal system is very strong and there is accountability.
Anupama, in Delhi, we've heard that it's not all politicians. I'd like to ask you about one politician, the Prime Minister, because he was always known, elected as the clean man, the man who had the experience as the economist, the man who drove the small car. Has the Prime Minister been affected by all this?
The impression about the Prime Minister of India remains that, he is the Prime Minister of one of the largest democracies of the world. He is a clean man. Nobody is questioning that. But the fact that there are so many ministers in his cabinet who are so unclean, who are corrupt, and he has not been able to do anything about it, making an excuse by saying that these are the limitations of coalition government. That is something that is not acceptable to people, and that is something that really unnerves people, and they feel that it's no point being the head of the largest democracy if you are not able to take your own ministers to task.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that point, and thanks to all my guests. From New Delhi, we have Nandita Rao, also in New Delhi, Anupama Jha, and Rani Singh from London. Thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome all your comments and suggestions. Email us, insidestory@aljazeera.com. Bye-bye for now.